With new technology, new research, and new information, more historical mysteries are being solved than ever before. But sometimes that research and information can leave experts with even more questions and more mysteries to solve. Number 10. In 1927, archaeologists excavating a temple complex in Cambodia made an astonishing discovery. It wouldn't be until almost 100 years later that the rest of the discovery could be made. Ta Prohm is one of the most famous temples at the Angkor Temple complex. Construction began on the temple in 1187, and once built it took thousands of people to maintain it. It was dedicated to the mother of Jayavarman VII. In the centuries since its construction, Ta Prohm has fallen into ruins. The Cambodian jungle has reclaimed much of the temple, cracking giant ancient stones and slowly pulling apart the bricks. Trees and other foliage still cling to the temple walls, although today they're maintained and the temple isn't truly wild. That doesn't stop it from attracting visitors, and it was even a location used during the filming of a Lara Croft Tomb Raider movie. While the temple is an important tourist attraction, archaeological work continues to uncover insights into Cambodia's past. These excavations have been taking place for over a century. In 1927, when the area was under French control, archaeologists uncovered the head of a large Buddha statue. The statue was in the Bayan art style, and researchers believe the features were based on those of Jayavarman VII. It was dated to the 12th or 13th century. The head clearly belonged to part of a larger statue, but there was no sign of this statue in the dig. The intriguing artifact was taken to the National Museum of Cambodia, where it was protected and studied. Archaeological work continued at the Angkor complex, although it was often disrupted by events going on in the region. More recently, though, international teams of archaeologists have been able to explore the area again, uncovering new artifacts and revealing more secrets about what Cambodia's past was like. In early 2025, a group of archaeologists from India uncovered something that would solve a long-standing mystery. It was the body of a statue, roughly 4 feet in height, and missing its head, feet, and one of its hands. The feet had been located elsewhere in the rubble, but the head was nowhere to be found. But advanced technology, including digital scanning, solved the mystery of the fragmented statue at Ta Prohm. A head found decades ago near the body was a perfect match. The statue, unique for its left hand on the chest, presents new questions for scholars, such as the reason for its pose and how it was broken. Possibilities for its damage include natural causes like tree roots and weathering, or deliberate destruction during religious shifts or colonial times. Number 9. At the end of the Second World War, tens of thousands of American service personnel were considered missing in action. In the decades since then, many remains have been recovered, providing answers to family members left behind. Many more still remain missing. In November of 2023, the family of Gilbert Haldine Myers were finally able to lay him to rest. The mystery began 8 decades earlier, on July 10, 1943. Myers was a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army Forces, serving in the 381st Bombardment Squadron, 310th Bombardment Group. At the time of his disappearance, the group's job involved flying over Sicily and attacking military targets there. July 10th was like any other day. Myers was the co-pilot of a B-25 Mitchell, flying alongside 5 other men. Their target was the Siaka airdrome. This was an important airbase for the Axis forces. Many missions had been dispatched from the site, hidden among olive trees that camouflaged it from enemy view. Malta, in particular, had been damaged by planes flown from Siaka, but in 1942, the airbase had finally been photographed by an RAF pilot, and now a full campaign against the site was being enacted by American troops. Myers' plane dropped its payload on the target, but as it did so, it came under anti-aircraft fire. The plane was hit and rapidly lost altitude. According to witnesses on the ground, one person in the plane bailed out, but the others could not escape before the plane crashed, and there were no survivors. The campaign in Siaka was a success, and the area soon fell into Allied hands. In the years after the disappearance, searches took place to try to locate the remains of the 6 men who lost their lives in the crash. It soon emerged that the pilot had been located by civilians and buried at a nearby cemetery. There were also rumors that German soldiers had removed 3 bodies from the crash site, but there was no information on where they had been taken. There was no word of anybody being taken prisoner, and authorities were certain they were searching for remains. In 1944, part of the wreckage was discovered by American investigators, but no human remains were found. After the war, the area was returned to the farmers who'd worked the land before it was taken over by the Italian military. Searches for any further remains took place, but the terrain made this difficult, and nothing was found. A 2022 investigation into a B-25 crash site uncovered wreckage, though, and human remains. DNA testing confirmed the remains belonged to Myers, one of the 6 lost airmen. He was buried in Florida in 2023. And while this solved one mystery, the remains of the other 4 flyers still remain missing. Number 8. The origins of the Uralic language family have baffled linguistic experts for years. Millions of people across multiple countries speak languages belonging to the family. But how these groups relate to one another and why they're separate from other groups has long remained a mystery. New DNA evidence has finally shed light on this historical mystery. Today, the most well-known examples of Uralic languages are Hungarian, Finnish, and Estonian. Other languages belonging to the family are spoken in northern Russia, in clusters around the Ural Mountains, and in northern Norway. The languages are completely distinct from Indo-European, the language family that most European languages belong to. Historians have been able to map the spread of this language family, although its exact origins are still debated. But the spread of Uralic has been much harder to determine. As the name would suggest, many linguists believed the origin of the Uralic language family was somewhere in the Ural Mountains. This mountain range in western Russia was a major obstacle to movement throughout human history. It's here where most of the Uralic languages are spoken today, with different groups of the language sitting on either side of the range. But this wasn't the only theory. Another theory suggested that the language originated somewhere further east. There appears to be some connection to Turkic and Mongolian languages, 2 other language groups that are not believed to be part of the Indo-European language family. As these 2 languages don't seem to have spread from the Ural Mountains, some linguists have theorized that the Uralic languages must have passed through other regions before reaching the Urals and Eastern Europe. New DNA evidence has backed up that theory. A 2025 study analyzed modern and ancient DNA from Russia, comparing it to modern Uralic speakers. It revealed that Uralic speakers shared DNA traces from Yakutia, northeast Siberia, a marker absent in other groups, thus connecting Uralic languages. Researchers believe hypermobile hunter-gatherers spread the language, primarily westward, during the Indo-European expansion. But the boreal forest prevented its spread north, where most Uralic languages are found today. While Yakutia DNA levels vary in Uralic-speaking regions, Hungary, an anomaly, shows minimal traces, though medieval conquerors who brought the Hungarian language did possess higher levels. This research clarifies the spread of these ancient languages and may inform understanding of their eastward expansion. Number 7. The USS Jacob Jones was the U.S. destroyer to be sunk by an enemy in the First World War. For over a century, the location of this historical wreck has remained a mystery. That mystery was finally solved in 2022. The Jacob Jones was launched in 1915, before the United States entered the war that was already ravaging Europe. But when the US declared war on Germany, the destroyer was sent across the Atlantic to help in the fighting. For much of 1917, she was patrolling the Irish Sea and escorting other ships across the waters. While the ship was fully equipped for attack, including depth charges specifically designed to combat submarines, the Jacob Jones was most well known for her efforts in rescuing the victims of other attacks. In July, the crew rescued 44 survivors of a U-boat attack on a British steamship. 2 weeks later, she rescued 26 of 28 men who'd been aboard another steamship sunk by a German submarine. One of her last heroics came in October of 1917, when she was escorting a group of steamers when a U-boat surfaced within the group. The submarine fired a torpedo at another one of the escorting ships. While others chased after the enemy submarine, the Jacob Jones stayed behind and rescued over 300 men from the sinking vessel. Just 2 months later, it was the crew of the Jacob Jones that needed to be rescued. It was the afternoon of December 6, 1917. The USS Jacob Jones had spent the day escorting troop ships to France and now sailing back to port. She was alone. At about 4:20 p.m., one of the crew members spotted a torpedo exiting the water. He called out and the captain tried to maneuver the ship in avoidance, but there was little that could be done. The ship was struck below the waterline and water started flooding in. The main mast was damaged and the ship didn't have power. There was no way to send an SOS message, and the crew of the Jacob Jones were on their own. Dozens of men entered the water. Even though it was only the mid-afternoon, it was already growing dark and the water was cold. To make matters worse, depth charges on board the ship detonated after the sinking, taking more lives and stunning some who were in the water. The submarine that had hit them was U-53, captained by Hans Rose. Rose ordered the submarine to surface a few miles from the scene and maneuver back. A few badly wounded Americans were taken aboard the German vessel before it disappeared back beneath the water. But Rose also sent a message to a nearby US base, letting them know of the sinking and where the stranded men could be found. Due to these actions, Allied vessels were able to locate the survivors. 38 men survived the sinking, but 66 were lost, including a man named Stanton F. Kalk, who had swam from boat to boat to ensure the vessels remained stable while they were awaiting rescue. USS Jacob Jones was sunk in a matter of minutes, and for a century, the exact location of its wreck was a mystery. It remained a major goal for divers dedicated to locating wrecks, due to its historical significance to the US and its allies. But there are many wrecks in the English Channel, and narrowing down which could be the sunken destroyer was a difficult task. In 2022, a group of divers from the Dive Star Wreck Exploration Team examined a number of these wrecks. On their second day of diving, they found one that matched the description of the Jacob Jones. It was located at a depth of 115 meters, not far from the Isle of Sicily. No human remains or personal items were collected, but signs on the ship confirmed that this was the missing vessel. Number 6. There are few relics as controversial or as well studied as the Shroud of Turin. While many scholars have claimed their studies have solved the mystery of the Shroud, it's unlikely that this mystery will ever be put to rest. One thing to make clear here is that regardless of your religious beliefs, and regardless of your historical beliefs, sharing this story isn't meant to sway you one way or the other. There are mountains of evidence that point towards the Shroud of Turin being legitimate, but there's also a significant amount of evidence that suggests it may not be. Regardless of where you land on the subject, we're merely sharing some interesting information that we found after scientists published some recent information on the subject. The Shroud of Turin was first written about in modern history in the Champagne region of France in the mid-1300s. It briefly faded into obscurity before reappearing in Turin, Italy, where it's remained ever since. The shroud supposedly has the image of a man with crucifixion wounds imprinted into the fabric. The man has long hair and a beard, and is believed by many to be the shroud that Jesus' body was covered with when he was laid to rest after the crucifixion. It was recognized as an important religious relic all the way from its time of creation up until the 1980s, when carbon dating allegedly placed the origin of the shroud around the year 1300s. But those studies have since been debunked, and others have claimed that there's evidence that the shroud can be dated back to the 1st century. A more recent study, published in 2025 though, has turned away from trying to date the shroud and has begun looking elsewhere for answers. According to believers, the image on the shroud was created by an extreme burst of light that left behind an imprint of what was touching the fabric at the time. but an analysis using 3D modeling proved that this may not be the case. The study compared a fabric draped across a body and one draped across a low-relief carving. These carvings were often used on gravestones in medieval times and could be made from stone, wood, or even metal. The impression left by a full body left warping, as the curves of the 3D features would make any impression spread and appear much wider than the original image. But the impression left by a low-relief carving showed no such thing. When comparing digital models of the two fabrics, the one covering a low-relief carving almost exactly matched the imprint on the Shroud of Turin. The other, showing the imprint that would have been left by a body, was much wider and did not resemble the famous relic. The study author believes that this is proof that the shroud was a piece of religious art and may have been intended as a piece of grave art when it was created. He suggested that the impression could have been made by heating a metal carving, leaving behind the marks that believers claim were caused by a burst of light. Critics of this supposed new hypothesis note that the low-relief model hypothesis has been proposed before, many times actually, but it's still never been proven. Experts argue that the model ignores the chemistry, forensic, and other scientific findings related to the Shroud of Turin, such as the fact that it can be dated back throughout history to the time of the crucifixion, and pollen spores embedded into the fibers of the shroud seem to confirm this, as well as the exact type of fibers that it's made from. There have also been claims to debunk the shroud, which suggests that a piece of its fiber was tested and only dated back to medieval times, but this fragment of the shroud that was tested was actually found to have come from a patch on the outer edge of the shroud, a patch that had already been confirmed to have been stitched onto the shroud during medieval times, meaning this entire test was botched from the start. There is evidence to argue either side, and while many claim that the Shroud of Turin has been fully debunked, others aren't so sure. Number 5. Sometimes the clue that solves a historic mystery is only found after re-looking at old evidence with fresh eyes. This may be how a biblical mystery related to an Assyrian king is finally solved. Sennacherib was one of the most famous Assyrian kings. He ruled the empire between 705 and 681 BC. His reign involved many military campaigns within his own empire, including the destruction of the city of Babylon in 701. But he's most well known for the Levantine War and his siege of the city of Jerusalem. Sennacherib's campaigns in Judah are retold in the Old Testament. According to this story, an angel struck Sennacherib's campsite outside Jerusalem and took the lives of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Sennacherib escaped with his life, and a peace agreement was made with the kingdom of Judah. Assyrian sources and chronicles from other kingdoms in the area are less fantastical, and modern scholars believe that King Hezekiah may have paid for Sennacherib to leave. It wasn't only the outcome of the war that scholars have debated. Another mystery is where exactly Sennacherib's camps were placed. Solving this mystery involved looking back at carvings that once decorated Sennacherib's palace. The art depicted some of the highlights of Sennacherib's rule, including military campaigns. Art historians looking at these reliefs again noticed something unusual. Sennacherib's camps were elliptical in shape and divided into sections, which contained the king's royal quarters and soldiers' tents. The camps would have been surrounded by defensive walls. The details depicted in the reliefs have never been thought about much, but now some scholars believe they could hold the key to solving the mystery of the locations of the camps. One researcher took to the earliest aerial photos of the area looking for any evidence of these elliptical structures. Jerusalem wasn't the only city that had been attacked during the ancient war, and the initial focus of the study was the city of Lachish. This was a fortified city on top of a hill, and one of the campaigns depicted in the reliefs. Previously, it was believed that Sennacherib's camp would have been at the bottom of the hill, but re-examining the reliefs showed that there was a second hill positioned between Lachish and the campsite. Going back over the aerial photos, researchers found a hill and the remains of an oval structure. The direction of the oval matched that depicted in the relief. Archaeological records showed that there had been a period of activity in the area around the time of Sennacherib's campaign, but before this, there'd been nothing. After this, there was also nothing. This wasn't the site of a long-established settlement. It had only been occupied for the short time of Sennacherib's siege. With one site at Lachish located, researchers turned their attention to the camp that would have been made near Jerusalem. Previous archaeological work had already located a scene of a military camp in the area, but this was believed to be Roman and part of the siege of the city in the 1st century. But once again, the elliptical pattern could be seen when viewing the camp from above. Roman military camps were typically rectangular in nature. The two sites proved to be promising and could potentially be the locations where ancient men prepared for battle that would be remembered thousands of years later. But other researchers have warned against declaring the mystery solved too soon. Archaeological research will need to take place at both potential camps before this mystery can officially be considered solved. Number 4. The Plague of Justinian was one of the most devastating events in human history. The disease cost the lives of millions of people across Europe and northern Africa, and changed society forever in the places where it hit the hardest. But for centuries, exactly what the disease was has remained a mystery, one only solved recently. The plague first arrived in North Africa in 541 CE. For a long time, Egypt had been the breadbasket of the Eastern Roman Empire, feeding the growing population, especially in the empire's major population centers. So a huge amount of grain was being shipped from the center of the plague outbreak in Constantinople and other cities. Disease-ridden rats hopped aboard the grain ships, and soon the disease was spreading rapidly through the empire. Historians aren't certain just how devastating the disease actually was. There's a belief that many of the writers at the time were exaggerating just how bad things were. But we do know that millions of people lost their lives. In some places, burial practices couldn't keep up with the numbers. Entire families were wiped out, and the disease reached every level of society. Even the Emperor Justinian caught the disease. Luckily for him, he managed to survive, and the empire itself didn't completely collapse. The empire would recover once the worst of the plagues had passed, although it would be hundreds of years before the outbreak was considered over. Given how prevalent the disease was, there were plenty of descriptions of it for modern historians to try to piece together its identity. According to the writer Procopius, those suffering from the disease had delusions, nightmares, and fevers. The most telling symptom, though, was swelling in the groin, armpits, and behind the ears. Some victims would lapse into a coma, where only the actions of dedicated family members could keep them alive. To historians, this sounded a lot like the horrific accounts of the Black Death that would sweep through Europe centuries later. Despite how horrifying the Justinian plague was, it didn't come close to the damage done by that later incident, though, which wiped out at least a quarter of Europe's population. But that didn't mean this wasn't a strain of the same disease. It wouldn't be until 2013 that there was anything to confirm this. In that year, scientists were able to analyze the remains of a victim found in a graveyard in Germany. DNA analysis revealed the bacteria Yersinia pestis, the same bacteria responsible for the bubonic plague. Number 3. In 1337, a priest named John Ford was attacked in broad daylight in a busy London street. The person who orchestrated the attack was never punished, but even if a jury was confident they knew who was behind the attack, historians have remained baffled about why the attack happened. New research and a newly uncovered letter have revealed the truth. The attack on Ford was seen as a major crime. Witnesses watched another priest stop Ford and distract him with conversations before 3 other men ambushed him. Ford was struck by a blade in the stomach and throat, then left to lose his life in the street. The attackers didn't do much to hide their identities, and witnesses were able to name one of the men as Hugh Lavelle, a man from a powerful noble family, and the others were recognized as former servants of Lavelle's sister, Ayla Fitzpaine. Fitzpaine was a very powerful woman. She was married to Robert Fitzpaine, a baron in Dorset. Ford had actually served in a church on the Fitzpaine estate and had once been close to the couple. but years earlier there'd been a falling out. A jury was brought together to investigate the crime. Even though the identities of the attackers were known, nobody knew who they were, and little effort was made to find them. Only one person was ever punished for the crime, one of the servants, who served 5 years in prison. At the time, the jury would have known that it was likely Fitzpaine who was behind the attack, but no effort was made to confiscate any of her possessions, and she continued to live happily without any trouble. To historians looking back at the records, it was obvious Fitzpaine's wealth and power meant she had avoided justice. But the mystery was why she would want to commit such a crime in the first place. A letter from the Archbishop of Canterbury about Fitzpaine was the first clue in the case. The Archbishop wrote about how he'd heard stories about the noblewoman. She'd conducted extramarital affairs with numerous men, including knights and clergymen. The only person who was actually named, though, was John Ford. Fitzpaine had confessed to some of the cases, and the Archbishop had determined she was guilty in others too. As punishment, she was ordered to conduct a humiliating walk of shame, walking barefoot across Salisbury Cathedral, carrying a heavy candle once a year for 7 years. She was also ordered not to wear jewelry or makeup and to donate money to various charities. Fitzpaine's failure to punish Ford, despite the Archbishop's displeasure, puzzled historians. They suspected Ford might have informed the church, providing a motive for a later attack. But the Archbishop's extraordinary focus on the case and the Fitzpaines' seemingly untroubled marriage after the affair raised further concerns. Another question revealed that Fitzpaines ran a criminal organization, including Ford. They'd attacked a French priory, stealing goods and holding them for ransom, a crime more likely to grab the church's attention. And this also explained the public attack on Ford, likely a message from the gang to deter other informants. Number 2. During the Second World War, hundreds of thousands of pieces of art were stolen by the Third Reich or their sympathizers, mostly from Jewish people or others who were targeted by the regime. After the war, many of these paintings were recovered and returned to their rightful owners, but many more disappeared without a trace, never to be seen again. In August of 2025, one of these missing paintings reappeared in an unexpected place. Jacques Goudsticker was a Dutch art dealer living in Amsterdam in 1940. After the Netherlands were invaded by Germany, he helped other Jewish people escape before trying to escape himself. Unfortunately, he fell into the hold of a cargo vessel that was supposed to take him to safety, but the incident cost him his life. After he passed, his vast art collection was sold under duress to German government officials. Thousands of paintings were looted. Among those was a portrait of Contessa Caglione, also known as Portrait of a Lady. This was a piece of art by the Italian master Giuseppe Gislandi and dated back to the 18th century. Despite recovering parts of Goudsticker's looted collection, Portrait of a Lady remained missing. In the 1990s, Goudsticker's daughter-in-law and a Dutch newspaper campaigned to find it. Documents revealed the painting might have been with Friedrich Kajian, a German official who funded the war by selling stolen Jewish items. After the war, Kajian fled to Argentina, where he had 2 daughters. Though his daughters were uncooperative, a reporter noticed one was selling her home. Photos on the real estate website showed Portrait of a Lady hanging in her living room. Investigators were certain this was the missing painting. It matched photos of the painting, and they claimed there was no reason why anyone would want to forge it. It wasn't a particularly famous painting, and Gislandi's paintings typically sold for only a few $1,000s each. Local authorities were informed of the discovery, but when they raided the home, they found the painting was replaced with a more innocent work of art. But finally, in the first days of September of 2025, Kajian's daughter produced the artwork. She'd always said she didn't know what painting the investigators were talking about, but now it was obvious she not only had the painting, but knew that it was something that others had been looking for. Portrait of a Lady might not be the only looted artwork that Kajian's daughters inherited from their father. A still life work by Abraham Mignon was seen in the background of a social media post by his second daughter. This painting still hasn't been recovered, and just how many paintings Kajian left Europe with and how many remain in his family's possession remains a mystery. Number 1. Scientists trying to piece together the mysteries of human evolution made a major breakthrough with DNA analysis of a skull found in China almost 100 years ago. The skull was given the nickname the Dragon Man when it was finally brought to the attention of scientists some 90 years after it was found by construction workers building a bridge over China's Shaohua River. The fossil puzzled experts, but DNA evidence helped solve the mystery of the skull and a much older mystery that scientists have been trying to solve for decades. A farming family brought the skull to a university in 2018. They've been keeping it hidden for 3 generations. In 1933, while China was under Japanese control, workers building a bridge in Harbin uncovered the skull. They knew that they were looking at something special. It was unlike any modern human skull. To keep it safe, one of the workers took it home and left it at the bottom of the family well, where it would remain until the family finally retrieved it in 2018. A well-preserved 146,000-year-old skull was found, its origin identified by soil analysis. The skull, with a long, low brain cap, large nose, and almost square eye sockets, belonged to a man with a brain comparable to modern humans. Scientists considered it a new species, Homo longi, or Dragon Man, named after the Black Dragon River region. Others were unsure, given the muddle in the middle period, when 3 human species interbred, making classification difficult without DNA. Another theory was that this was the skull of a Denisovan. The Denisovans were a human species that were only identified in 2018. So far, only fragments of remains had been found, and it was only through genetic sequencing that scientists were sure the species was distinct from others. If the skull were a Denisovan, it would mark one of the biggest discoveries related to the species. DNA testing would be needed to find the answer. Unfortunately, testing of bone and tooth fragments didn't reveal any ancient DNA that could be tested. Scientists took a new approach, scraping plaque from the Dragon Man's mouth to analyze. Most of the DNA found was identified as modern contamination, but there was enough ancient DNA to test. The tests revealed that the skull most closely matched DNA from the fragments of Denisovan fossils. The Dragon Man was what this ancient human species looked like beyond a few teeth and bone fragments. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.